Hey, well, some of you got on okay. That's great. Nice to see you. See a lot of familiar faces. Hi, Brian. It's been a while. Rick.
Catherine, good to see you.
Yeah. I see a lot of familiar faces. I kind of wanted to see everybody because I have some questions to ask. Because what I want to know is how many of you are familiar with the TriType concept? How many of you are comfortable with your TriType? All right. Yeah, one of the first things I'm going to cover is how important it is to have the right TriType. And in the very beginning, when I discovered TriType in 1994, I just went with the prevailing thoughts at the time that if you identified with a type, that was your type. But shortly thereafter, with this research, I discovered no, it isn't what we relate to. It's the actual idealized image, core fear, and defense strategy. You must have all three of those for your core type and the other two types in your TriType. So a lot of information was disseminated on TriType, not understanding how important that is. Why is it so important? Because those three idealized images, sets of idealized images, merge to create a very specific idealized image according to your TriType. And those three sets of key core fears merge to create your individual sensitivity to things on a mental, emotional, and visceral or physical level. And then the third factor that's essential is that you must use the defense strategy of the types you have in your TriType. So a lot of times, especially 9s and 6s, because they're meant to see the other side of every situation and all points of view, it takes them longer to land on their TriType. And the mistake they'll make is go with the situation at hand, the conditions. And that is definitely a part of their defense strategy. The problem is that it doesn't help getting the right TriType, because if you're looking at the situation, you're not looking at the overarching truth. What's true for you most of your life, most of the time, and every day, especially when you learn to bear witness to your own process, which all of us pretty much try to do with the Enneagram. So when you have 6 and 9 in the TriType, you're naturally going to identify with your heart type. And that's a common mistyping for those that actually lead with 6 or 9. Now, you could lead with your heart type. That's a different story. But if you lead with your heart type, then you're going to be comfortable with it, but you're not going to really still maybe understand your head and heart if they're 6 and 9. Now, why is that the case? The most important thing to understand is that 3, 6, and 9, the primary triad, is meant to adapt and change depending on the circumstances. So the 3 adapts to have the best image and to be seen as having the best performance. So they'll change on a dime to show you their best self. And then the 6 changes according to who they're interacting with. So they'll be tough. They feel like they can and they need to be, or maybe they'll backpedal if they've come on a little too strong and they're met with resistance, but they will alter their behavior based on the conditions. And the same with 9. 9 sees all points of view, and so they don't want to really land on one, and so they don't commit to a particular point of view. Instead, they're comfortable with the kind of sense of consensus and what'll keep them in a positive rapport with people. So they might not say what they really think. Of course, 1 and 8 do, but 9 doesn't. 9's holding both. And the same in the heart center. 3 knows what their idealized image is, but they're going to change it. Whereas 2 and 4 do not change their idealized image. And then the same in the head center. 6 is trying to say, okay, what image will keep me safe? What thoughts, what viewpoint will be the best one I should use to be safe in the world? And we all want to be safe in the world, all 9 types. But the 7 has a very clear image of themselves, and so does 5. So 3, 6, and 9 are adjusting at all times. And when I first did this research, I asked people, once they knew their TriType, did it make a difference? Did they see qualities that they didn't see before? And a very large percentage, originally 80%, said yes, absolutely. And 20 to 25%, depending on the research, because I've done 24 studies now, said, no, I mean, it helps, but I kind of already related to the types in my TriType. So, of course, I went to see what TriType people had, and all of them had the 3, 6, 9 in that 20 or 25%. And it makes total sense because 3, 6, and 9 already have access to all 9 types via their wings. And so it wouldn't be as eye-opening. Like David Daniels said, hey, as a 6, I always knew my lines to 9 and 3. He said, but TriType helped him as a 6 that his gut type was really 1 and his heart type was 2. So he was actually a 6, 1, 2 or 6, 2, 1. They were very close for him. And I knew David Daniels really, really well. And he was there in the very beginning when I was sharing my research. And that's why he did that little mini video, if you've ever seen it, where he's talking about his TriType. But it does make a difference if you have a type in the TriType that is different from your lines of connection. And that's how this all emerged. So what I want to do today is just introduce what the symbol itself shows. I really want you to see it visually. But one thing that struck me when I learned the Enneagram and was working on understanding what TriType meant, I remembered my fascination with this Aristotle. He suggested that true internal harmony could only be achieved when those same internal conditions allow for each aspect of the psyche to perform what it's primitively meant to do. And we can look at the Enneagram and the subtypes and the TriTypes is making us aware of the different facets of our personality on a primitive unconscious level. And when we are aware of them, we can achieve this conscious understanding of these biological imperatives. Now, when the Enneagram was first introduced in 1970, the theory was that it was largely based on nurture, because that was the trend in 1970, the shift from everything's nature and genetics to nurture, the environment in which we grew up in. But very quickly, it was easy to see when children were being born and then growing up that their type, if you knew how to type and you knew proto-analysis or other systems that helped you recognize the particular features and the use of the muscles, then you could see it really at birth if you had the training on microexpressions as well, which I did, and behavior analysis, which I did. And not that we can't change behaviors, but there's a way in which we observe the world and those muscles become more developed. So if we're constantly questioning or thinking about things, the pros and cons, then these muscles are developed. And so a lot of times you'll see 6s, where when they're thinking about something, they go, what? You're kidding. Well, I'm not so sure about that. And it's because they're just like if we work on our bicep, then it becomes bigger and more pronounced. Well, the same thing happens with all the features in our face. So those features really recognize more about type than we're even aware of, because types predictably use some emotions more than others. Whether we look at 6 or 7 emotions, because there are different theories on it, you can still see that we all use all emotions, but which do we use more? And that will show based on your type. So the Enneagram really lets us see what is more important to you than just your core type. Your core type is still the CEO of your TriType, but the CEO of your whole defense system is actually your instinctual stacking and the type at the top of the stacking. So that's what alerts us that something is wrong and in need of immediate attention. And it doesn't matter if it's real or imagined. So the unconscious nature of the human condition, we react according to our projections. So if we perceive something as dangerous, like if we're just anxious about maybe missing our flight because we didn't leave at the time we wanted to, and maybe we will miss the flight, maybe we won't. Being anxious doesn't help us get there faster, but it's a defense strategy that puts us on red alert, and then we act in accordance with that. Speeds up our adrenaline, our heart beats faster, and that's why understanding the types and the TriType really help people begin to recognize that. So what I want to introduce is the importance of the numerical value of the TriType and the geometric shape and where your TriType is in the Enneagram TriStar is what I call it. So originally I had found that every type, with this one here, that every type had something in common with every other type. Now, how do I know that? Is the best tests that were made in the very beginning, one of which was made by Don Riso. He took all the ways that types are similar, and then you had to choose between them in the long ready test. And then he carefully went through all these corresponding similarities and differences, and then came out with the pattern of the types you used. And if you look at the types, they do. Like if we look at 8, 9, and 1, what do they all share in common? They trust their gut. They're visceral. What do 2, 3, and 4 have? They trust their heart, what they're feeling. What's the rapport with the other person? And what's similar about 5, 6, and 7 is how they weigh and measure the truth of something and how they manage chaos. So I created this symbol and then distinguished it with the difference with TriType, which simply meant I remove the connections within the center. So when you're looking at TriType, you have one head type, one gut type, and one heart type. So the first symbol I used was just using the Y-shaped divisions for the centers and then a circle around your TriType. Now, TriStar. This is what I want you to see today, because if we integrate these qualities, we see more about our core type than we even understood. Now, the interesting thing is when you get it right, it's like a master skeleton key that can go in and open up things that you didn't realize were available to you. So for example, I'll go with my own because it's easy. Where is 4, 7, 8 in here? 4, 7, 8, that TriType sits on 0.4. Now, what do 4s always say about themselves? That they're creative. Now, there are 3 types that are creative, and it's 4, 7, and 8. So it's very logical that the 4, 7, 8 would be at the 4 position. But what does that mean? It means a 7 with this TriType is uber creative, as is an 8. And so our strength is that we have creative problem solving. We see things in new and novel ways, and we get things done, but we have a particular viewpoint. And then you just need to know what type is in the lead. Now, conversely, the type that's exactly the opposite of the 4, 7, 8, which is conforming by the book, doing things as they should, is the 1, 3, 6 right here. So once you learn the correct TriType, you'll also learn the TriType you have the last access to, which lets you know, in a way, who complements you in their abilities and perspectives, but who might be a little frustrating because they don't see things the way you do. But we all have complements and we all have combinations. Every point is important. So the first point is that first urge, type 1, then nurturing whatever the urge was. So let's say the first urge was, we need more food, we need to plant more trees to take care of the community or the individual, either way. We have to have the nurturing of those plants for them to come to fruition. So they have to have water, they might need shade, they might need protective barriers or things that will keep off the insects that could harm the tree. So nurturance is essential. Then the third element is production. So in order to have these trees or tree, then you need to have this ability to have many trees. And so the 3 is about producing. And then the 4 is about really that individuation and specialization. So point 4 is meant to specialize and to create, it's the first break from standardized. And that's why sometimes 4s are saying, oh, 3s are so commonplace. But actually, 3s are doing what is universally needed as a primary type. And then 4 is meant to say, wait a minute, you need to go with quality, with expertise, with specializing. So the 4 is saying, okay, you've got this orchard of trees, but only some of them have fruit that tastes good. And so that's what they're going to be focused on, exclusivity and those dynamics. And so you can see if specialization happens at point 4 in the Enneagram of process, it's like this for you, then you can understand why the 4, 7, 8 would be the perfect TriType that matches that. But as I said, the most important thing, these 9 TriTypes that are coming off of the 3, regardless of what the TriType is, they are initiators of their particular combination. Some we would expect. All the types with 3 in them, we think, oh, they should all be in that triad. They're not. This is the beauty of the unfolding process. And that's how it all begins with 3, 6, 9, just in the continuation of the Enneagram of process to understand why these positions are so critical, is that the 5 is the position not of identifying the most ideal trees, but instead classification and the beginning of protection, which means if you think of any really extraordinary book that has every reference you could want, it will be 9 times out of 10 created by a 5, whether it's botany or the animal kingdom, all those variables of what constitutes a particular type. A lot of the early creators of those systems of reference were 5s. They have a natural inclination to pay attention to that kind of detail and to want to assemble it, to have it thorough and complete. In particular, it's the 1, 4, 5, just for those of you who want to know. which is up in the integrating TriTypes, and the exemplar of the 1. So the 5 is classifying and then storing what's needed. And then the 6 is saying, okay, wait, now how do we distribute this fruit tree or the pears from the fruit tree fairly, evenly? And they're also guarding. So regulation is what is important for the 6. They like regulation. If they're going to deviate from regulation, that's their choice, but they don't like other people to deviate from it because they want to know what to expect. And then in the terms of this analogy, they're often guarding that storehouse and giving everyone their fair share. And that's why it's so important for 6s and why we need 6s in every community, because they want things to be judicial. They want fairness, and they want people to come together and acknowledge what's needed in the way of fairness. The 1 starts the idea that we need to be fair and just, and we need a system that'll make that happen. But it's the 6 that wants it implemented in a way that, in essence, is justice for all. And if you know about the early teachings from Machazo and Naranjo, 6 is the point of how you observe others. That 3 is the point of what you need to do. Who are you, or who am I in the case of the 3? And what do I need to do to stand out? What do I need to achieve? My achievements make me valuable and keep me safe. And then the 6 is, okay, what do I need to defend to be safe? What is fair? How do I know who's fair, who isn't? And it's like, what are other people doing? So you don't have to be a social to be aware of what other people are doing. 6s are always aware. And so are 5s and 7s, by the way, the whole head center. Having said that, the 7 is saying, okay, we've all got our fruit trees, they're classified, they're organized, we've determined the most ideal tree. Now we're using that criteria determined by the type 5 to plant future trees, but we need to actually enjoy and create a celebration around what we've accomplished. And point 7 is bringing others together in a positive environment. And so the 7 is wanting to set the kind of like after there's a harvest and then you have a festival or you enjoy it and you all share, you break bread together. There's usually food and anything of this nature. So if we're talking about a group or a tribe, often we'll have a potluck. People bring food, and then or if we're hosting the event ourselves, then we're providing food. It's very rare for an event not to have something that brings people together. And whether it's just drinks or appetizers or food, it's historically true in all cultures in one way or another. So 7 is celebration, and then also saying, well, how can we optimize this? So optimization begins at point 3 and is implemented in a new way with new ideas at point 7. And then at point 8, it's consumption. It's like, okay, let's just eat the fruit already. Okay, we're having a great time, but where's the fruit? And let's also seek protection. Now, this is the difference between 6 and 8. 6 wants to defend what is right and what they believe should happen. But the 8 is far into the future, because the point of future is 7 and 8 is beyond that, only looking at vulnerabilities. So it's like, wait, we've got this storehouse and we have the protection for those that might take more than their fair share. But what about these marauding tribes that come through and would take our storehouse of food? We need to have scouts noticing what's going on at the perimeter. So that's why 8s are looking at the big picture of what is safe and what needs to be planned for. Whereas the 6 is looking for how they are going to make sure things are safe in their immediate environment. So 9 is really an interesting point because in a 9-fold system, everything begins and ends with type 9. So in order to have that first urge, there has to be the move out of type 9, which is harmonizing, whole, and complete, and move to the first urge. We need more food. We need to improve a system. We need to do something that needs to go into action. And then after it's all completed at point 8, and let's say consumption happens at point 8, then at point 9 is what? It's assimilation, it's digestion, it's completing that process. And if you know with animals that one animal could eat something with a seed and then later eliminate it a mile away, and then a tree or a fruit or whatever it is, a little seed bearing, usually trees, someplace else, and then it propagates a larger area. So everything, you'll see it everywhere in the world. But what I want you to see about this image is that this actual beginning of 369 is the core of everything we talk about with the Enneagram. So the first thing you need to know is that 9 is the center and breaks into these 3 in this triangle. But having said that, 8 and 1 are just mutants of type 9. I'm just a mutant 9. Instead of waiting and measuring what I should do, I take immediate action. If it doesn't work, I change it later. No big deal. I'd like to get it right in the very beginning, but I know I'll want to make it right, and I won't argue with something that's better. I'll implement it later. But the 8 feels that immediate need to take an action. Then 1, on the other hand, says, wait a minute, I need to do some research. I need to check it out to make sure what needs to happen, and then offer it as an opportunity to do something, as a possibility. And, as a well thought out possibility with due diligence. So that takes time. And then the 9 is saying, well, wait, do I do it immediately or do I wait and I get the details? Well, it'll work its way out and we'll see what happens. And then if nothing happens, then I'll move in. But there's an openness to consensus at point 9 for that reason. So then when we look at 2, 3, and 4, 2 and 4 are mutant 3s. They have the same dilemma because they're in the same triad, but they're a specialized version. So the 3 is saying, yeah, I got to perform. I won't have value if I don't perform and achieve something admirable. The 2 says, I can create that by creating rapport with others, and no one can create immediate rapport better than a 2 or someone with 2 in the TriType. And they can initiate welcome wagons or 2s. They're the most welcoming TriType of all is the 2, 7, 8, just to give you a point of perspective. So each TriType that's in this outer star is like the most specialized version of the triad they're in. And then if we look at the head types, 6 being the core and noticing others, 5 and 7 are just mutants on 6. 6 is trying to hold both, but the 5 is saying, I need to stand back and observe without being observed. And what does that mean? That means I won't have any interference. If people know I'm observing, then what happens? They could say, why are you doing that? Why are you staring at that person. And that would be uncomfortable. Even when they were children and they might study a little bug or something they didn't quite understand, they'd give it a lot of attention. This is where 8 and 5 are similar. You'll see it in the eyes. They're penetrating eyes. They're looking through things. They're looking at details. And of course, 8 and 5 have aligned to each other in the standard Enneagram. Enneagram just means 9 points. So anything with 9 points is still an Enneagram. But that's why I call it TriStar, just because it looks more like a star. But the 5, as opposed to the 7 is saying, well, rather than a singular view based on all the data, I want the view that will enable me to see all possibilities and have the diversity, the variety, and they know that they can comfortably create rapport with those they want to create it with, which is why the most rapport-driven type, the 2, 7, 8, why 7 would feel that way. And 8 says, hey, I think people are interesting. Yeah, I like what you're saying. Yeah, you're great. Hey, I'm great. We're both great. On second thought, you're not so great. Neither am I. But it's the changing element. It's arrogant pride. The 8 is just very flippant and easy to say something's great and then diminish it and mean nothing by it. And all types, when they're coming from their average level, are reasonably enjoyable. In fact, most are very enjoyable. Coming from the high side of our type, we're very nice to deal with and interact with. The low side of our type, all the types are kind of difficult. We really don't like any of them when they're coming from their low side. But the way to understand how that low side will kick up is through this TriStar map. So I want to say one more thing before I go to the variables, that what happens is you begin with the 3, 6, 9, which adds up to 9. The 1, 4, 7 adds up to 3, and 2, 5, 8 adds up to 6. So it's not by chance that the integrating types are at 0.9, or the initiating types are at 0.3. So 1, 4, and 7 adds up to 3. So there is a mathematical logic to all this. We begin with the 3, 6, 9, and then it's variations on theme. So the first variation from 3, 6, 9 is to go to 3, 7, 9 and 2, 6, 9. So that's why they're in this first mutation out. So we begin with 3 primary types, and then slowly we are adding the hexad types, the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, until all permutations have been met. And those are the 27. Now it goes on forever, just like the 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. It's infinite. But this first round that's so meaningful can be seen in the TriStar, and the concentric circles let you know how early your TriType came into being. And the types in the outer stars are the rarest. So the most common is 3, 6, 9, and then 2, 5, 8, and 1, 4, 7, because those were the first triads we used. So it was all always there, and it shows a wonderful variation on theme. And that's why we have the 1, 4, 6 over in the opposing TriTypes. And the 1, 4, 6 might say, well, wait, I'm just trying to get it right. Why wouldn't I be over by the 1? Because they don't integrate. Instead, they're calling off what needs to improve. It's 3 types that are focused on critiquing situations. So they're actually opposing what is not done in a proper way or in a way that they feel is correct. But how do they accomplish that? They're a 2 within the opposing triad. They're critiquing, but they're trying to create rapport at the same time. and they see everything as more beneficial with another. And if you know any 146s in any order, 641, 416, 146, they always like to have a counterpart that they can bounce things off of. But they may mistype as a 1 or a 4 at first. But what triad are they in? A lot of times when I'm doing the typing sessions, you could have one of the rare combinations and be in as a TriType in a center that makes you appear different from others. And since I know MBTI, I can understand those nuances where people are really a particular example, like the 458 is one of them. They will baffle people that are using MBTI and trying to go with standardized ideas of what types have what MBTI. And you have to look at TriType, and then you get the specifics. Notice that the 458 is an 8 on the 8 line. They are the most exact example of an 8. Now, we think it's 258 because that was one of the early triads. But if you go with what's actually going on with the TriType, it's 458 in any order. It's triple arrogant, it's triple confident in their viewpoint. And they are, as Russ Hudson said, Don used to say he was like an intellectual pitbull. And this TriType is, they know what they think, they're consistent about it, they will share it. And then people say, that person can't be a 5, they're too overt. Or, oh, that person can't be a 4, they're too opinionated and outspoken. Where's that shy, sensitive, self-absorbed? It's still there, but the TriType means that when they feel that energy ignited, it's they disagree with something, they're going to assert their viewpoint. They're like mental 468. Well, the 468 is over here in the opposing triad, and they have 9. So they're going to see the opposite or what's missing, but they're going to want immediate resolution. So the 9 says, yeah, let's integrate it. Let's get to peace and resolution. The thing is, not everything can be resolved immediately. And that's why 468 struggle on an emotional level. Well, the 458 is saying, yeah, if we just get the facts, we'll know what's the right answer or the better answer, really. And then the same if we go over here, as I mentioned, the 278, on the other hand, is, wait, we don't need to be defined by any borders or boundaries. Let's just pursue what we're interested in. So it's the most hedonistic, fun-loving, free-flowing TriType, and that's why they chose the free spirit. 4 is a free spirit as well, but we feel a sense of discipline that they don't have. And the 478 is going to disseminate whatever they've learned. If it's to their friends, their colleagues, their extended family, everyone will know what they've found. And that's why they all agreed on the messenger. Some of us liked catalysts or other words, but then we thought, okay, anyone with 4 might choose that. So we agreed on messenger. And the names evolved very early on because people were used to names being associated with the types. But what was challenging is getting people that were accurately trityped. But once I had enough people that were accurately trityped, I could bring them together via email before there was Zoom, before there was Skype, and ask them what word they would like. And then I brought them together and go, okay, these are the words. What could you agree on? Then it would go back out. So as an 8, the way I do things is I do it more like an 8 than a 5. I go out, 8, 7. I go to the broader world, extroverted ENTP. Everything fascinates me, and I love change and dynamics. I want to talk about it. I find it important. And so that's what I'm going to focus on, that combination. Now, all 478s are not ENTPs, but there's more ENTPs in 4, 7, 8 than anywhere else. They can also show up with 6s, but they're more argumentative if they have 6 because they're in the opposing triad. Like the only 6 in the initiating triad is the 1, 3, 6. So often they're the 3, 6, 8s. A lot of the definitions of the ENTP match 3, 6, 8. And yet 4, 7, 8 has more ENTPs than anyone. And then if we go up here, there'll be a 4, 5, 8 says, I'm really an ENTP, but I'm introverted, so I must be the INTP. But often that introversion and extroversion are very close. But it's how do you go outward, or do you just follow your own gathering of the data? And that's a little bit more the 5. But if the 5 wants information, they'll methodically go about gathering it. In fact, 5s throughout my years with the Enneagram, which is 40 years now, would go all over the internet and gather data of things I said in different places and put it together, which I really appreciated because I didn't remember what I'd said. But 5s have that natural inclination to want to gather all the nuggets and see the common denominators. So everything is meaningful, and I love TriTypes in a 3-week course, but I just wanted to give you a taste of what these triads, which become the TriTypes, are actually focused on. So I wanted to show you some of the early pieces. I went through what each center relates to, but it's important to understand that anxiety belongs to the head center, but having people not understand the difference between mental chaos and anxiety and emotional anxiety. The emotional anxiety is your heart because you're feeling it as a pang to the heart. And then the feeling of shame arises, or not being enough, or not being seen in a way that will keep you safe. And then the gut types, it's focused on kind of those visceral instincts. And anger is, do you move or do you not move? And so it's based on our actions, our physical actions. But that includes not doing anything, like 9. So do we go into what we need to, or do we avoid it? It's still part of the gut center. So then the numerical value I explained. So just really these interactions become important. And the geometric shape I'm going to show you at the end because they're not random either. And I didn't create the shape. It's coming from the Enneagram, and you can just see the interconnectedness. But that's why you have to get the right TriType, because if you're in the wrong TriType, then you're not seeing that skeleton key. And like when my work was first disseminated, people that were very enthusiastic, which of course I loved because it was so transformational to my clients, to me, to everyone I knew, and I wanted everyone to have it, but they didn't understand the criteria for determining the right TriType. They didn't understand the idealized image, the core fear, or the defense strategy. Like I will interview people that have booked a session with me, and I'll do the in-depth inquiry, and they really want to be, let's say, a 4 or an 8 or a 1, a type other than what they are. And in the interview, I can get around the superego and see what their emotions are saying, and then ask questions based on those expressions, as opposed to how do you experience anger in your life? How do you experience perfection in your life? Because those, to me, are leading questions. Like, you're going to get someone focused on your question rather than what naturally emerges. But once you get around the superego, you can see things that supersede someone's idea of what they think they value. So there might be a split, like if they're answering something, their face might say they don't believe it, but they may not know that. And so it's really helpful at that point to then ask questions that help ascertain what those specifics are. Maybe they agree with part of what they're saying, but not another part. And so I can do this inquiry to find out why it's split. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. It just reveals your type. So once you understand it, then you can see these interactions in your own process, and you can begin to map it. And then obviously this helps with our challenges and gives us opportunities to take those very same challenges and see them as ways to expand our awareness. And implementing the change can only happen with the right TriType again. So like on Personality Cafe, for example, which was very early to share my findings on the site, someone put my whole book and the little charts on my book on there. And someone maybe new to the Enneagram who didn't really understand it's not the type you think you are, but what you're actually using, might say, I'm that TriType and I don't do that. And then they would take the whole list of the 27, repost it, and then change what I wrote. So it looked like it came from me, but they didn't cite me anymore. But 99.9% had still come from me, but there were additions that I would never teach because they aren't true of the TriType. And so that naturally happened. And that was the onset of the internet. And I really know that it happened by accident, but unfortunately, people started misunderstanding some of the TriTypes, and they went with their idealized idea of what the type should be like. And it's not that, it's the merge of the three types. So if you get three TriTypes that are focused on doing things the right way, being efficient, being thorough and diligent, like a 1-3-5, it amplifies that TriType of needing to do things in that specific manner. Just like if you get the 2-7-9, you have three types that want easy relating. So they're totally a rainbow type. The 2-7-9 and the 3-7-9 are always seeing things from the rosy perspective, and it's not by chance. So if you don't get the three types correct in the beginning, you're not going to relate to your TriType. And what I noticed is the changes that people made innocently were because they were actually a different TriType. And usually it meant they didn't recognize that they had 6 in the TriType. So why oppose it anyhow? Well, that's what 6s are meant to do. They're meant to oppose things that don't seem right to them. So to me, it was a master understanding of the types, but they didn't know enough. The people that made the changes had not taken a course and understand the differing views. And in all fairness to everybody, until you understood the way Achazo introduced the types and the way Naranjo understood the types with his additions of the he added to the buckets of type, the psychological perspectives. But as he said, he was guesstimating based on all the research that had been done. So he loved Karen Horney, for example. So he put, like, which types are aggressive? Oh, yeah, that would be type 8, and that'd be type 7, and it would be type 3. So that aggression on some level went into those three types, but he modified it to match the type. And then he looked at Sheldon's body types and he said, oh, okay, who has which body type? And he put those in the buckets. Those didn't come from Achazo. All of that work came from Naranjo expanding Achazo's work. So you need to understand what Achazo meant, what they kind of collaborated on for a short period of time, and then what each man did independent of the other, where they went with their work. And Achazo went into systems, and Naranjo went into the psychological perspective of how to break the suffering of the type. And that's what Achazo wanted as well. So both were doing that. But when they were doing their own work, they went about it in a totally different way. And I had the good fortune to spend 10 days with Naranjo, and he was willing to see my research because he liked my research that had been published on the any style, which is the image, self-projection, and style of each type, what we value. And he really liked the words and the vocabulary and the lexicons. So when I was in his class, he'd asked to see my research, so I brought it. And he was really pleasantly surprised because he had not been given credit for creating the instincts, the subtypes. Instinctual triads were Echazo. Naranjo changed those to centers of intelligence. So that gets confusing to people, but Naranjo did it out of respect for Echazo to not violate his copyright. So when he saw what happened with the qualitative research, and Naranjo was a researcher. He had a Fulbright scholarship to Harvard and worked with the personality studies there. He first went to Ohio State and worked there, and they were the leading university doing personality research. And then he ended up in Berkeley and worked at a number of research centers on personality. So he really knew personality and could add so much to the Enneagram. And he was pleased that my research identified the kind of the lexicon, because that came out in his research, which none of us really knew about. And I didn't meet him till 1996 and learned a whole lot about the types that were not disseminated. And I have an article that I wrote about him, and that intensive because there were so many things unknown that most of us know now, but it's worth reading if you don't. And it's called Reflections on Type. And you can get it on at katherinefauvre.com. If you scroll down the right column, I have my blogs, and you can just type in, Naranjo or reflections, and it'll come up. So there are a lot of things that Naranjo kind of made known, but because he had not taught for almost 24 years. So his first teachings were then kind of stalled because of the conflict over using the Eureka material and people not honoring the confidentiality agreement. So he waited, and so did many others, to publish. As a result, he didn't publish till like 1994, his first book. As a result, people that wrote the first books never studied with Naranjo or Echazo. So they didn't know what they didn't know. And so it filled in so many gaps for me and what wasn't taught. And I had 3 certifications at the time. So I knew what Don and Rusty taught. I knew what Helen and David taught, and what Ted and Kathy, the 3 original certification programs you could be in. And then my research. So then when I found all these things, then Naranjo validated it. And so that was great. And so when he taught that class, we included my work on the instincts and then his views of the 27. And then that came up with the core definitions. But there were core definitions out there that he hadn't approved. So you might see they're a little different. And I know I promised the updated books, and the subtype book is nearly ready. We just have to get the proof and make sure that it will be the way you want it. If it was just a PDF, it would be easy, but I'm trying to make it so if you want the physical copy. So I'm going to introduce the subtype book because there's so much advanced material in there and charts. And I'm working with a wonderful man that has made all these charts so that it's easy to see everything, because I'm not so good with technical or any of that, but he's made that possible. And then I decided it needed to be the accurate history. So I had to do a lot more research, not just what I knew, but like seeing exactly where things came from and whom. So that's what slowed me down, and some health challenges, but they will be out soon. I promise you. It just was a little complicated time period. So back to this image, it's fairly new. It's when I was really looking at how they unfolded mathematically. Now, I did have some early beginnings and let me show you. When I worked with Naranjo, I understood the way he saw the centers, the mental, emotional, and physical. When he came up with the idea of subtypes, he noticed that there were holy ideas and holy virtues, but there wasn't anything for the gut. So he put the 3 instincts here in the gut center. But I found with my research that what was missing was not something in the gut, it's that it's the domain of holy actions. Now, what you need to understand to make sense of this is that when the Enneagram was first disseminated, it only had the virtues, the passions and the virtues, and those were universal with all teachings. And what became distinctive was that I found what the issues were, and Naranjo validated what I found, which was great. And then over time, I said, yeah, these are 4 different things. There are the 3 centers and then the 3 instincts underneath it. And what Naranjo had done is very important. And that is, he took Echazo's 3 triads, the way he described the gut, which is conservation, the heart, which is relation, and the head, which is adaptation. But at one point, he had syntony at the heart and syntony at the head. But then at the time of his death, he was consistent with conservation, which is like self-pres, and then relation, like building that rapport and relations with others. And then the head, of course, is like, what do you need to know or learn to be safe in the world? And what gives you reassurance? Like for a 5, what gives them reassurance is the knowledge that they can find and research and come across and amass to make sense of things. Whereas a 6, it might just be a nice person that's reassuring you that they'll help you out if you have a problem. So if you understand that conservation, relation, and adaptation were put under each Enneagram type as these 3 variables, it did not interfere with those 3 triads. So let me just highlight the fact that Echazo never taught integration, disintegration, and neither did Naranjo. That was a mistake and went out through the Jesuit line, and we all talk about it, but it's not true in the way it's taught, meaning you still can disintegrate, but your whole system disintegrates. So that means your type, your wings, and your lines disintegrate as well. And when you're doing well and you're coming from your high side, it's all integrated. You, your wings, your lines. Now people say, but aren't we one wing over the other? No. That was also a misunderstanding. Now, we can identify with one wing more than another, but to be your type is the tension between the wings, because the Enneagram is an Enneagram of process. So to be a 3, you're leaving the issues of 2 and moving to a broader audience before you go inward into 4 and individuate. So it's a process, but you might say, I identify more with the 2. One thing that Don taught early on, and Don and Russ together, was to say, imagine little connecting dots here. And where were you if you were a 3 on the dots? More here, right between 2 and 3, or between 3 and 4? It was very clever because we do have these identifications, but we always have both. And again, if we're coming from the high side, we're really enjoyable to be around. And if we're coming from the low side, we're all a mess. So the first image that I created with a friend was this one. And what it stuck out immediately is in this unfolding, like the variations of these 2, the variations of the 258, there are these, the variations on the 147, 359, 136, was that looking down at the TriType, you could immediately see the first TriTypes we found. Now, the 147, the 369, and 258 were always there. People just didn't realize it. But if you look at coming off the 3 line, this would all be 3 over here. This would all be 6, and this is all 9 up here, is that the 135, the 279, and the 468 are the harmonics. So it's natural that we would see their similarities. And then what we recognized very quickly, actually before the harmonics, was the Hornadians. And those of us that studied Horne, I studied Horne in high school because she was a leading figure on feminism. She was countering Freud and seeing the same issues for women with men and men with women and what have you. Cassandra and the complexes that occurred not just with men, but women envious of men and men envious of women, that they were balanced. So those of us that knew Horne kind of had a dispute. I remember I think it was 1994 at the conference, the first Enneagram conference, where we kind of were talking about it. And most people were saying, oh, the 3 aggressive types were the 3, 7, and 8. Excuse me. And another type was saying, no, the 3 aggressive types are 8, 1, and 3. And they didn't know the centers or the significance of trialectics. And I said, well, if we go by Echazo's view, and that's what we're looking at, we have to go with trialectics, which means there's 1 type per center. So then the people that were fixated on 1 being angrier or more assertive than 7 said, oh, okay, if I have to do it by center, all right, 8 wins over 1, 7 wins over 6 and 5, and 3, no one disputed. But that was pretty early. By 1995, most of us were in agreement on that. And it's understandable if you didn't really understand the critical factors of the centers themselves, you could make that mistake. But doing the unfolding and seeing the way these stood out as the direct line off, so this would be the 3 line, and this would be the 6 line, and this would be the 9 line, to me was not random. I love patterns, and it was just too consistent. It wasn't like coming off at this angle. It's coming off specifically at the 3, 6, and 9. Then I knew that it needed to have a way to see it according to the 9 types. And that's when I came out with the first TriStar that I called the TriClaw, because it kind of looks more like claws. But it's the same as what I showed you without the centers separating it and without you recognizing what type it is. But this is still 0.9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and back to 9. It's just another way of seeing it. But people had a little trouble with it until they really knew all the TriTypes. And so I said, okay, you just need to see the name and the numerical value to understand more about your TriType. So then Val made this image for me so that when I teach, people could see more about it. And it does help to see the names. I really get that because I like seeing the names. And then you see all the variables going around. And what many people don't realize is that if we look at the original symbol, everything is numerical with the Enneagram. So if you add 8 and 1, it equals 9. If you add 7 and 2, it equals 9. If you add 6 and 3, it equals 9. 5 and 4 equals 9. And then adding the lines, if you add 1 and 2 with 4, what do you get? You get 7. And you just keep going. Everything means something, and you see the unfolding just in the basic Enneagram of the 9 types itself. So all TriType is doing is going beyond that. Now, I wanted everybody to have this chart, if you don't have it already, which shows you the idealized image and core fears. And this is what I later added, like when this chart was first created was when I was in the fashion industry, just dealing with, 1,000 people under me. And then I got many of those any style questionnaires because of that. But when I learned the Enneagram, I thought, wow, these perfectly match. And then that's when I added pride with, so you know what is happening. And you'll, if someone doesn't then display the defense strategy, like if they think they're a 4 and they don't have introjection as a dilemma, and you have to understand what those mean, then, or it's minor, then it means it's probably in 3rd position in their TriType. And if you don't have vanity as an issue, you can be like vain kind of on a biological level. They've recognized that they can see it in the DNA or like the warrior gene and empathy, but they look at kind of different qualities to recognize that. So for example, I have the warrior gene, but I also have the high empathy gene, and that's sensitivity. Now, for some people, sensitivity makes them self-conscious. For other people, sensitivity makes them more aware of the feelings of others. And they reference it in terms of childhood. So childhood intelligence. So I have high childhood intelligence, but I also have high propensity for my DNA to have learning differences, which in school are disabilities. But if you add the high IQ, no one ever knew I had dyslexia because I had my systems of figuring things out. And it was more that I just had to read things over a few times instead of skipping lines. So you'll notice I put everything in boxes and delineate. And I think everyone learns that better, but I have to have it that way because of my dyslexia. So I'm chart crazy. So here's a way to look at the core fears and what TriType tells you. So if you see your own TriType, you'll recognize those fears. If you don't have the fear, you're not that type, and you need to look for a different type in that center. So this is one I want to give you as well. So if we just isolate the 4, 7, and 8, it's whatever type you lead with. In my case, it's 8, XS. Yeah, I have over 1,000 PowerPoint slides just on TriType alone. And whatever I do, I overdo. But I want all the variations, 7. I want a lot of what I want, that's 8. And I have duplicates of some things which take up space on my computer, but you never know, it could get contaminated. And just in case, and sure enough, just recently, I lost a whole PowerPoint. I go, then again, I'm excessive. I have another one somewhere, and then I could go find it. And I also could make a mistake. So having many variations is just normal for me. But the 7 has the gluttony, and it can be mental gluttony. So I physically want everything to never be disempowered. And then mentally, I have that, intellectual gluttony, more. Like my son is an 8, but he's an 8-6. He doesn't have the same gluttony for data and details that I have. I mean, 8 has a natural line to 5 and 5 to 8. And a 5 relates a lot to the way I operate as an extroverted version of them, because 5 has a line to 8 and a line to 7. And 8 has a wing of 7 and a line to 5. So they're definite similarities, but how we go about it doing is macro versus micro. Small motors, one way to look at it. Like I always think 5Z can do all that little detail. Yeah, let me play tetherball or play tennis or do something big with large motor. Small motor is always going to be not my strength, to put it mildly, but I love those details. But amassing them, another story. So what you're going to be able to see, going back again with your own TriType, is, do you have those sets of fears? Now, the little individual videos that you can get that are now, instead of 65, they're on sale for 45. You get your version. When I go through TriType, I do it from every perspective. So you see the collage, you see this chart, you see the passion, fixation, and conviction. And as I said, the holy idea, the holy virtue, and the holy action, which is the only way to neutralize your TriType when it's inflamed. When it's on fire and overreacting, you can't just tell it to stop because it's a defense strategy. Instead, you have to look at the holy qualities or the higher ideal, whatever word you want to use for the higher expression of the type. And that's where it can really make a difference. Okay. Anyone have any questions? Okay. Thank you all so much. Hope to see you again in the future. Bye-bye.